She grew up in Savannah, earned one of the first women's athletic scholarships at Mizzou, spent her career in sports media and education, and now she's written the book that women's college sports history has been waiting for. In this Caitlin Clark, Sarah Strong, Lauren Betts era, Karen Rudolph joins us today on the 3994 podcast. But before we dive in, a quick thank you to Crawford Construction, Pancakes, Pups and Suds, Gina's Cafe and Catering, Greater Than Financial, North Central Missouri College, the Savannah campus, and Scooter's Coffee. We appreciate their support of stories like this one right here on the 3994 podcast. Karen, welcome. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you so much, Jody. I have been looking forward to chatting with you and in a couple days being back home in Savannah.
We're so glad to have you. Well, as a fellow Mizzou alum and Division I athlete, you know I am honored to have you here today. You have paved the way, and I would have loved to be courtside cheering for you all those years ago. So it's just so ironic and interesting that I used to cheer for women's basketball at Mizzou, and you happen to be, an alum.
Yes. Oh, Jody, you would have joined dozens of fans. We would sit on the bench and count the number of people and kind of look and see whose parents had sat where. But things have changed so much since that time. And all of us who played in those early years of intercollegiate athletics are thrilled to see the opportunities that women have today and really to take some small sense of pride in just advocating that if this was a good thing for boys, and it was, then sports were also a good thing for girls, and they are.
Well, I mean, I have so many questions about it, but I want to give everybody a little bit of a background. As we said, Mizzou alum, you received that first women's athletic scholarship, one of the first in Mizzou history to play women's basketball. And you went on to be this freelance journalist, magazine editor, writer. You spent years teaching and coaching basketball and softball at high school level. But your latest accomplishment is this book, Sidelined No Longer, the Untold Story of Women's College Sports. And here you really dig in deeper to a turbulent decade after Title IX and the fight over really who would actually control women's college athletics. So the story is rooted in Missouri. It's long overdue. Karen, does that really pretty much sum up your bio?
Jody, I think you've nailed it. Your assessment of girls sports, women's sports at the time is spot on.
So we have to ask you, though, that moment. You're 18 years old, right? You're the star athlete, one of them, the other being your twin sister at Savannah. Was the scholarship to you a surprise?
Well, yes, somewhat. But as women's sports really started back following Title IX, the women's organization that governed championships was unsupportive of women's athletic scholarships. They were unsupportive of recruiting. They were unsupportive of many of the things that I think we take for granted today, that girls would be afforded the same opportunities as boys. And so the University of Missouri didn't start women's athletic scholarships until my junior year of college. And I received one of the first 6 women's basketball scholarships, while my twin sister Sharon received one of the first 3 softball scholarships. And the university invested more in the basketball program at the time because they felt like it was the only women's sport that would ever have the potential of earning revenue. And so they gave them a little bit bigger boost with the number of scholarships and some of the funding, using it, being able to have assistant coaches. So it was really a process for this women's organization that governed women's sports nationally. It was called the Association for Intercollegiate Athletics, for AIW, known by its initials AIAW, the Association of Intercollegiate Athletics for Women. And they were slow to embrace, I think, true competition for women's sports. Many of the physical educators had come out of a physical education background where they, maybe as youngsters, were involved in girls' play days, where girls from different schools would come in and compete against each other for a day. There was no training or preparation for that. In fact, it was actually discouraged. I can remember as a junior high school student going to St. Joe Central and participating in these play day activities because there were so few and women's sports were not encouraged. So in the beginning, the Women's Athletic Organization, the AAW, was against women's athletic scholarships. And it took a couple of college tennis players from Florida who filed a lawsuit and said that right after Title IX was passed by Congress, that women should also have athletic scholarships. So the AIW gradually accepted that maybe this was a good thing also to include and to offer to women. So the first year really that women's athletic scholarships were available would have been at Mizzou, the 1975-76 school year. And so the funds at the time were very limited. In fact, our scholarships at Mizzou consisted of almost like a work-study program. We had one semester of tuition that was funded, and then we could qualify for work-study hours by putting in so many hours of work for the second semester of tuition. And that first year, there was no room and board. There were no books. There were no tutoring opportunities for the women athletes. It was simply tuition, one semester tuition. Believe it or not, Jody, $292 was what would fund one semester of tuition. And so we were thrilled at just having this. Now, it's kind of funny. The jobs that were assigned varied in complexity and requirements. For instance, some of my teammates might have to do the books at the women's volleyball games, or tape the ankles of the football players before practice every day. Or like me, I was assigned to work in the press box during home football games, which I loved. So as far as doing that, it was almost like a student internship that also paid for my scholarship. Now, the stars of the team, they had somewhat simpler jobs. One of my teammates, her job was to get out the basketballs before practice every day. Well, the true top scorer and most outstanding player, she later earned a spot in the Mizzou Athletics Hall of Fame. Her job was to supervise the automatic sprinklers on the athletic field. So we had a bunch of different jobs. It was kind of funny many years later, we were chatting about this, and we gave Sharon Farah, that Intercollegiate Athletics Hall of Fame nominee or honoree, we gave her some trouble when we found out what her job truly was. But yeah, no, we were thrilled just to make tiny steps, and that's really what they were at the time.
Well, just thinking about that timeline, so it's not like they had a big party for you when you were a senior in high school with this big scholarship. I mean, you didn't get the scholarship, what it was, until you were well into Mizzou. It sounds like your junior year. And so when you think back to Andrew County and really where it all started for you, you had a really great support system. And it sounded like not only was your mom and her friends and your family and relatives supportive of you, but they were supportive of really the athletic community in Andrew County and beyond. Can you tell us a little bit about that and why, you've looked at this Andrew County Aquatics Initiative and been like, yes, keep it going?
Oh, absolutely. I think growing up in Savannah, it was where I first learned about community and the importance of athletics, the importance of history, the importance of communicating. And so just being a part of that as a child, 9 years old, many of the parents in my parents' generation supported a number of activities that required that they invest in facilities. One of those facilities was the Rolling Hills Regional Library, because when I was younger, we had a bookmobile that would come in every week, and my mother made sure that we were first in line to, check out books. We were that eager. And they supported a bond issue for a new high school. But one of the most important things I think that they supported through their taxes was a community pool. And so as a 9-year-old, my mother, who was, probably just had turned 30, she and her best friend would travel to St. Joe every week throughout the winter because they wanted to earn their water safety instructor ratings and then manage and organize a free to the public Red Cross volunteer swimming program. Now, they weren't the only ones that participated in offering these free Savannah swim lessons, but they were two of the most important women that were enthusiastic and just were going to embrace an opportunity because their heart really went out to kids in Savannah learning how to learning how to swim. And not just that, but learning how to compete in a community recreation swimming program. Now, many people who are my age will tell you all about that swim team, boys and girls, Friday night swim meets. Sometimes the farm boys would come in with their farmer tans because they had been working in the fields all week, and they would come in and swim their hearts out for this community swim team. And so many have fond memories of that, boys and girls swimming together, suffering together when it was a cold June night. And it was just really, really incredible, which is why I am so impressed by the Inter-County Aquatics Initiative today and seeing the efforts that are put in to restore this facility, to be able to fund it through not just taxes or bonds, but through community donations, because the facility is so important to the life of Savannah, to the community of Savannah. So before I go any farther, just congratulations for all the work that has been done by Diane Gould and so many others. And for those who have donated, not just monetarily, but also in terms of goods or services to make sure that this community treasure is still available for kids and grandkids.
So I want to talk to you a little bit about your book. Basically, it has these roots, right? The roots come from Northwest Missouri. They come from Mizzou. Tell me about how writing the book, has that lens on it. It's the filter from which you wrote it. What did you take away from these areas that you put in the book?
Well, I think that having played sports at a time when women were not encouraged to do that, it was unusual. I'm not sure that most of my classmates at Savannah High School understood where Sharon and I spent our summers, but we were traveling and playing softball for the North Missouri CTs. The team was sponsored by Nanita Carter and her husband Warren, and they took the funds from her teaching salary at a high school in Bethany, Missouri, to sponsor the team, while they lived on funds from a grocery store that they owned in Bethany. And unlike many parents today, we were a team that was totally sponsored. Today, parents put out thousands upon thousands of dollars to have their children compete in club or travel ball. But this team was sponsored entirely by Warren and Anita Carter. And we would travel hundreds of miles all over the Midwest during the summer. The team paid for all the travel costs. They paid for the hotel, the gasoline. There were no coaching fees. They paid for uniforms. They paid for tournament entry fees. They paid for everything that you can imagine would be required to have a team. And the players, like Sharon and myself, were only required to pay for our personal items, our cleats, our gloves, and maybe some hamburger money on weekends. But, by playing for this team, it built confidence in myself and in Sharon. By the time we graduated from Savannah High School, we had won 4 Missouri State Amateur Softball Association women's fast pitch titles. And many of the players that we played against were from the college level or beyond. And so we really had this sense of confidence, not just from the physical improvements, the strength that we had, the discipline that you get from playing sports, but also from the confidence that somebody believed in us enough to sponsor this team. Now, my parents also deserve a lot of the credit for this because they would buy our equipment, and at first they would buy whatever run-of-the-mill equipment would do. But as we learned to take care of it, as we learned to polish our shoes and iron our uniforms and take care of the things that they purchased, that then we received better shoes or better gloves. And so it was all this process of my parents learning that we really were invested in doing this. This was something that we wanted to do. Competition was a thrill. In Savannah, and I'm talking about community spirit, there were a couple of times when I was in high school where the Women's State ASA Championships were held in Savannah. And Savannah had a population of about 3,000 at the time. It was definitely a community engagement because we would have probably 2,000 people who would show up at the city park who would cheer us on. And so I took this kind of confidence working with boys and girls on the community swim team, cheering for each other, supporting each other, practicing, laying down a base of physicality that many girls my age didn't get to have, playing softball, traveling, gave me a confidence so that when I went to the university, I was ready to take on the world. Now, the ironic thing is that the University of Missouri was somewhat like the larger high schools in Missouri. They were somewhat behind the times in terms of engaging with women's intercollegiate athletics. You had to work hard to find out when the tryouts were for these teams. And by chance, I kept showing up at the women's gym so that I knew exactly when I could try out for basketball or softball. And so it took a lot more for these large universities like the University of Missouri to build their program. Interestingly, the smaller state universities, which had begun as state teacher training institutions, had far more developed programs than we did at Missouri. And it was because it attracted the better athletes. Southwest Missouri State, now known as Missouri State University, had probably the strongest overall women's athletic program in the entire state because their students were hoping to become physical educators and maybe coaches. And so we would compete against, they were always the big kid on the block. And it took a lot for Missouri to begin to develop it. But, I have to tell you, Jody, and everyone who might be listening, even though Missouri was behind, it seemed like a replay of high school. When I was in high school, my twin sister and I were wondering why Savannah couldn't have a girls' basketball team. The Missouri State High School Activities Association had just started regional or district championships for girls when I was a junior. And so we thought to ourselves, why can't we have a team at Savannah? And so we passed around a petition to the 600 or so high school students, and most of them signed our petition. And armed with that, I began looking at what it would cost to have a high school team. I looked at what a coaching salary would be, what it would cost per mile to rent a bus and take it, how much uniforms would cost. I looked at the entire gamut. And this was before computers or Excel spreadsheets. And honestly, it's a good thing Sharon was extremely good with numbers, because she did a lot of the numbers. I might find them, but it was Sharon who actually put those numbers together. And so we went to a school board meeting probably in February of my junior year and presented this idea. We presented the petition that had been signed by probably half of the school, and we presented these numbers. And so they listened, and it was intimidating, to say the least, as a high school junior, to be able to talk about this and to present what it was that we wanted and it was going to cost. And so the school board president, whose name was Gerald Hoffmeyer, asked for a show of hands, and slowly, one by one, each one of those school board members embraced the request that we had made on behalf of Savannah high schools and for future generations of girls who might someday get that opportunity and more to compete for Savannah High School. And the school district did it right. They hired the best coach in a man named Don Coulter, who was from North Andrew High School and had been successful there. They gave us some great uniforms. Sometimes we traveled to away games with the boys team, but they set up a schedule as best they could. And we were all a bunch of beginners and were just little competitors. That's all I can say. We finished 14-4, got to our district championship, and really began to set the bar for Savannah High School girls sports. So much in the same way, I got to Mizzou. I saw a program that some of my softball teammates said, Karen, don't go to Mizzou. That's not where you'll want to play. They really don't have anything. Go to Central Missouri. Go to Northwest Missouri. Go to Springfield, to Missouri State, and there you'll find a good program. But our family was raised on University of Missouri and University of Missouri athletics. My dad played football there, and he had told us, each one of us, and I have 3 siblings, that when we graduated from high school, we could go to any college or university we wanted to. But the only one he was going to pay for was Mizzou.
Yes.
And so that's how we ended up at the University of Missouri. And I'm thrilled that I got to go there because of the connections I made and just being able to see the program change so much. The chancellor of the university, Herb Schooling, appointed me to a committee that investigated Title IX and whether or not Title IX was being applied correctly at the University of Missouri. So I got a background in what was going on, what was expected of by Title IX. And so by doing that, by continuing to advocate, just like I did at Savannah High School, we began to see changes. And like I said, by my junior year, the university had initiated scholarships. The university, my senior year, hired a women's athletic director and combined the men's and women's athletic departments. And so that was really when the women's program at Missouri began to blossom. So years later, I heard, I was at a Title IX and celebration of women's sports in 2022. The university's athletic director was Desiree Reed Francois, a woman, something I never would have imagined back in the day. And Desiree had invited all of the first women's teams at the University of Missouri back to celebrate where the program began and where the program was now. And one of the featured speakers that night was a woman named Jean Sarah. And Jean's told some of the most outlandish, crazy stories. And afterwards, she and I were chatting, and our paths had crossed somewhat at the university. And so she kept saying, I need someone to collect these stories. And I would shake my head. Yes, you certainly do, because I felt like they should be shared. And so at first the book began as sort of a biography about Jean and the University of Missouri. And it didn't take long before I realized that the bigger story was the foundation that was laid for women's sports and how they had to change and actually move out of this women's athletic organization that governed women's sports and move into the National Collegiate Athletic Association. And it wasn't an easy transition. I can honestly tell you, you can read about it in Sidelined No Longer, but it was controversial, quite controversial. And so the book really began in 2022. But I think it was my background in sports in Northwest Missouri, at Savannah High School, at the University of Missouri, my appreciation for history through teachers like Richard Zachary or Harold Johnson at Savannah High School, my appreciation for writing through, again, my teachers at the high school and at the university. They inspired me to take up journalism and to aspire to be a journalism major at Missouri. Unfortunately, I couldn't complete all of the classes because many of the classes at the university required afternoon labs. I played two sports, and so we always had practice in the afternoons. And so I took the classes that I could during summer school, and really it goes back to a summer school class. At the time that Jean Sarah was hired, I was a student in News 105. And when you take journalism classes at Missouri, they're very thorough. And I had been in the class maybe a week or two when I was assigned to interview this new women's athletic director at the university, Jean Sarah. And I got the assignment not because of any skill I had, maybe because of my background in sports and athletics, but I got to interview her and talk to her and get to know her as a junior in high school. But it wasn't until years later that when I was researching book and I saw the 4-column story about Jean Sarah being hired that I realized that was my first byline ever in a daily newspaper. So, just my paths crossing with Jean Sarah, my own background in sports, the writing that I did with my decades of experience, the coaching that I did for another couple of decades in both softball and basketball. Those were the moments that really prepared me to write the book.
It's incredible when you think about that. I mean, that being your first interview and all these years later, now you have a book. I mean, there's so many little nuggets on the shelf at Rolling Hills. You're going to speak at Rolling Hills Library. Your mom took you to the bookmobile. You have a book now that is on the shelf of that library. Your first interview is with Jean all those years ago. This book is really based a lot on what she was able to accomplish. And hello, let's give the shout out to Harold Johnson. He's one of our Patreons.
Oh, that's awesome. I wasn't aware of that. I still stay in touch. I think it was either my junior or senior year, the history department at Northwest Missouri State sponsored a competition called the Brain Bowl. And it was much like the GE College Bowl, but they would ask you lots of questions about history. And so we would go with various history teachers, social study teachers from Savannah High School, and we would tape these competitive segments. There were 16 schools that were invited from the 4-state area, Iowa, Nebraska, Kansas, and Missouri. And I think just with the way that they taught history, it engaged me. I was interested. I was a good student, but I got to be on this Brain Bowl team. And oftentimes, my twin sister Sharon, who also was on the team, I think Larry Williams was on the team, Barb Calloway, they were on the team, but the question would be asked, and I would buzz in as quick as I could because I was just confident that I knew the answer. And so it would take me maybe a couple of couple of seconds while they called on me, and I would come up with the answer. Whereas I think other students would just wait until the question was final, and then they would make sure that they had thought through the answer. But I I was just crazy. I would just buzz in and hope that I knew the answer. Well, I ended up being second in this overall competition in terms of points scored. Thank you, Harold Johnson, for your preparation. Thank you, Richard Zachary. But our team, I believe, finished second in this overall competition, and I'm not sure how long it lasted. It was broadcast on the local radio station, and it was just a lot of fun. That was one of the highlights of being in high school at Savannah.
Oh, I love that. Well, Karen, it has been such a joy and an honor to talk to you today. Can you tell us how people can get a copy of your book if they're interested?
Oh, absolutely. And I hope you will. You can find that on Amazon, and just Google Sideline No Longer, or put your query as Karen Rudolph, and that book will pop up. Another way would be to order it through a local bookstore or through the e-commerce sites for Barnes and Noble, Target, or Walmart, and you can order it that way. It also helps if you'll join my social media. And I'm learning about this. This certainly isn't something that we had in my younger years, but I'm learning that if you share, or if you comment on social media, and that would be sidelined_no longer, then you would be able to hear any updates, whether or not I might be in an area that where I could visit and talk about the book, or we could meet. So that social media aspect is really critical to the growth of others learning about the book and being able to enjoy the book. Interestingly, this book has resonated with so many people my age, women who perhaps didn't, or men whose sisters were unable to participate in sports and athletics. And it also has resonated with young people who understand the opportunities that are available, who believe that there were always 91,000 volleyball fans who cheered on the University of Nebraska in the football stadium, who maybe today always felt like women were featured in commercials, or women had these opportunities. And, sometimes in the back of their mind, it's like, well, how did we get here? So this answers that question for them as well. The book isn't necessarily about statistics. It's not necessarily a sports book. It's stories connecting then until now. And so many people have commented on that, the stories, the details, the credit that's given to those early founders and trailblazers. So, Jody, it's been delightful to chat with you today. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it so much.
Well, thank you. And you have blazed the trail. So we want to thank you for doing so for hundreds of thousands of women. And many of our kiddos aren't educated in all of the things that they need to be. And I think this book gives us a wonderful opportunity to do that. So thank you. Well, like Karen said, if you're listening or if you enjoyed this episode, please share it, make a comment, give us a like, or support the 3994 podcast. We're grateful to our sponsors who make this show possible, but you can also support us as a Patreon, and you can learn more about that in the links below. So be sure to click on the show notes. We'll see you next time.